Welcome to Of Sound Mind and Spirit. I'm Shelly.
And I'm Lisa. We're sisters walking together on a journey of faith. We're not perfect.
And we definitely don't have all the answers.
We're inviting you to walk with us as we explore ways we can better know and grow in our faith together. Welcome back to another episode of Sound Mind and Spirit. Hi, Shelly.
Hey, Lisa.
How's it going?
It's going just fine today. How about you?
It's good. It's a beautiful day here, and I'm excited to spend a little time outside and soak up some of that sunshine. Today on the podcast, we're looking forward to talking about one of our favorite ways to know and grow in our faith and to spend time with God because, as we've said, that's very important on this journey that we're on together. So today's topic is spiritual reading.
Woohoo!
Most people hear reading and they either cheer enthusiastically because they love books and love reading, or they groan and want to hit stop on this podcast right now.
Well, I guess you know where I stand.
Yeah, I think we know. You love reading. And there was a time, I do love reading, but there was a time when I was that person who groaned. And I didn't really love reading as an adult. I think that the busy schedules, the kids, work, just life kind of gets in the way of the time and the opportunity to sit and be quiet and read. Also, really, years of reading in school, being forced to read, to learn, and not really picking what you wanted to read, I think that just kind of sucked the love of reading out of me. I'd forgotten that you could just read for enjoyment.
Yeah, and I had the opposite experience from you. So it's strange. We're both sisters, and we have such different perspectives on this on this topic.
On every topic, Shelly. Let's be honest. Well, as I talked about in the first episode, I really discovered spiritual reading really in my early 30s when I had a baby and a toddler. And it took me years to get through my first spiritual book. So I did not excel, but it really helped draw me closer to my faith. And it lit a fire in me to want to learn more and experience more of my faith. So spiritual reading has become an important part of my faith life. And as a side note, I think it's really inspired me to read for enjoyment more. So I'm now on the reading train. So woo me.
So, well, differently, I love to read for knowledge, for context. I enjoyed reading in college and in grad school to get all that context, right? And I think it really started very early in childhood because I loved reading. Do you remember those little Arch books that were Bible stories we read as a child?
And we had some that had records.
Yes,
do you remember that? And we would listen to them, read it to us. The first audiobooks, records.
I hadn't thought of that, Lisa. You were so right. Mom bought those all the time. Well, I think that reading those Bible stories is what led me to reading biographies in elementary school. I used to read lots of biographies in elementary school. And I think that fed my interest in studying history. I even studied the Bible in a humanities class in high school, of all places. And that's kind of where I got a lot of seeing the Bible as history, or the history of our relationship with God, I suppose you would say.
Mm-hmm.
And so I see spiritual reading as an opportunity to grow in my knowledge and what I know about God and learn more about him. And so even now, sometimes while I'm reading, I guess you could say God speaks to me through various teachings and things that I read. Mm-hmm. And I love spiritual reading now because it gives me the opportunity for him to reveal himself and tell me that there's something that he wants me to take away from that moment. And I wish I could say it lasts forever, but sometimes that lesson just kind of lasts for that moment. And other times...
Isn't that a cool moment?
Yes. And while some of them I don't remember, other times I find that some of those messages actually take root. And they grow in me and stay with me, and I find myself thinking about them even later.
I love that. I would say for me, spiritual reading for, and I'm not, let me clarify something real fast. So when we're talking about spiritual reading today, we're not saying spiritual reading is in place of scripture reading. And of course, read the scriptures, read the Bible. We're talking about other types of spiritual reading that we enjoy. So I don't want to throw that caveat out there. For me, I discovered, I didn't realize this going in, but like I discovered that my spiritual reading in the morning when I get up and after I would get the kids off to school and I have my little cup of coffee, it's a big cup, let me be honest. It's a big cup of coffee. And I would sit in my comfy chair and open a devotional, usually do scripture reading, open a devotional, and then pick up another book. And what I found was that time, that sitting, that was my be still and know God. That was my opening of prayer, because what I would find is it would get my mind busy, but I would open, and sure enough, there'd be some message or something that would fill me that day of what like you said, like I felt God wanted me to hear something. And I love that. It would clear my mind of the clutter and busyness by focusing in on what the author was writing. And the message of the author in scripture, in spiritual reading is God and growing in love of Christ.
I love that you and I have that same experience of God in reading faith-based books, spiritual reading, whatever you want to call it. And even though we both approach it from two different points of view, I think that's really powerful.
Yeah, it is funny. And that's one of the reasons I wanted to share about this, was because for the people who groan at the idea of reading, there's just so much. It's not a one size fits all kind of a category. I think of, like I said, for me, this type of spiritual reading, and we're going to talk about the different types of spiritual reading in a minute, but for me, the different types of spiritual reading, it is prayer. It invites me to meditate, to ponder, to reflect. I do a lot of writing and journaling during this time. Sometimes I just sit there and cry. Or it ends up being, I put the book down and I end up just praying.
Okay, I have a question for you.
Uh-huh.
Are you one of those types of people that underlines in your books?
Oh my
Or
gosh.
do you keep a separate journal to write it down in?
Yes, in all the things. I underline, I star, I circle, I dog ear, and I write in a journal.
That's funny.
I even take and I take pictures. I take pictures of pages. Yes.
I've done that because I never was the person that underlined in books until
You just can't do it.
probably
You can't write in it.
It took me a long time to think of a book as something I could write in and it be disposable, so to speak, if you know what I mean. And then recently got most of my books are starting to come in now in Kindle, and I'll find myself highlighting, but then I don't remember to go back and look at that. Okay, but now here's another question for you.
Mm-hmm.
How many books are you currently reading right now?
Can I check my Goodreads? I think it's 7.
I'm impressed
I read
you put them in your
books.
Goodreads.
Yeah, I always put them in my Goodreads. So that way, I hate to say that way, I remember what I'm reading, and where I am, because I mark my page numbers in there.
My daughter is getting Kindle books on my Amazon account, and something in it, she has it automatically post to my Goodreads that I'm reading the book.
Oh.
And I'm not reading the book. My daughter's reading the book.
That would, I couldn't deal with that. That'd
And
be
we
hard.
have very different tastes.
Yeah. Well, the reason I read so many, I know a lot of my friends are like, how do you read so many books? Really, the book I pick up depends on my mood. Some days it's just, I don't know, you know how it is. Like every day is different. Time of day is different where you're, and I keep books in multiple places. I know that sounds weird.
No, I'm mentally picturing your house and mine.
And
thinking
you
how
know,
many
I've got,
books are stacked up by every chair in the house.
In my car, I always keep a book in my car and one on my bed table. What I love about these and what helps me is how they make me feel. That sounds so touchy-feely, but how they make me feel really affects like how I read them and how I internalize them.
Of course, because reading a book is an emotional connection.
Mm-hmm.
If the author can't make you feel connected to the story or to the information, then you're going to lose interest.
Mm-hmm. Hmm. Yeah. And there are times I'll pick up like if it's a rainy day and I'm home and don't have anything to do, I'll go to my bookcase and pick up like 3 different new books and go sit on the couch and then just start each of them and see which one speaks to me that day. Okay, I know that's too much information.
No,
but
I do that too. I didn't know you did it. That's
Yeah.
funny.
But I wrote down some ways like how I read a book. So do you want to hear about that?
How you read a book?
Well,
Sure. Go
yeah,
ahead. Tell me.
depending on how it makes me feel and stuff. So
Okay.
the first one is one about reading it slow. There are some spiritual books that you read it really slow because you want to savor it. You want to spend time contemplating it, turning it over in your mind and really pondering it. And for me, one of those recent books was This Present Paradise by Dwyer. And it's relatively short chapters. And I was so tempted to read multiple chapters in a day, and I wouldn't. I stopped myself from doing it because I wanted to really think about what I just read in that short chapter. So I would force myself not to keep reading because it just got my mind going in all of these wonderful ways.
Oh, I have one of those. I know exactly what you're talking about. For me, it was Interior Freedom by Father Jacques Philippe.
Mm-hmm.
It was just as you described. You'd get into it and you'd be a sentence and you'd literally just sit and think about what you just read. And it took forever to read this very small book.
Yeah. I've read one of his. I haven't read that one. I've read one of his other books and had the same experience. Okay. I also have some that I've read very fast. Like on my couch one day, read the whole book because it's just like a gut punch of emotions and you're having all of these revelations. It really like hits you where you need that day and it's intense and it's like all consuming. I have to have this experience, all of it right now.
Oh, and I've got one or two of those myself. The one I want to mention to you, though, is one called Finding Sanctuary, and it's by Jennifer Hubbard. She's a mom who lost a daughter in Sandy Hook, and it was the most intense gut punch of emotions, what you just said. It was, that first chapter was probably the hardest ugly cry I've ever done, and I really did not want to read the book, but I kept being drawn to it. And the journey through it, just there was nothing else to say. I don't know how else to phrase it.
I love that. I love that you didn't shy away from it, that it was that.
And you've never read it.
I have not read it. Mm-mm. Mm-mm. My next one, I say it's like you're reading, like you're spending time with a dear friend. So emotionally comforting. You want to just sit and get to know them. You want to visit with them daily, and you do that through reading a little bit every day. And because it's just such a warm experience, and then you spend extra time thinking about them. And for me, one of those was Letters to My Lord, an intimate conversations with Christ, and it was Father Daniel A. Lord wrote it. And it's not a recent book, but it was new to me. And the book is letters. He wrote letters to my Lord. He actually sat and wrote letters. And so every chapter is a different letter. And so for that one, it actually inspired me to write my own letters to God.
I like that idea.
But I loved it. I gave a copy to our dad.
No, you didn't.
Uh-huh. Yeah, he has it. I just, like I said, it just gave me so much comfort and surrounding feeling of love to read this book.
Oh, wow. Nothing comes to mind for me on that one. Sorry. Put me on the spot there.
Okay. And one I know you'll have a lot of comment on is education. So books that you read that you take so many notes and you're underlining and everything because you're just learning and you and I both love learning. And then you find yourself inspired to put their words into action in your life. So those are the ones that I have the underlines and I've written all these things. And I would say, I'll think of it in just a second, that I can't think of the proper title of this book. So you go.
Well, anything by Edward Shree, for starters. There was a book we did in a book club called Surrender, The Life-Changing Power of Doing God's Will by Father Larry Richards. And that one, I remember underlining nonstop in there. Right now we're reading Father Michael Gately's The Second Greatest Story Ever Told. And you want to talk about learning as a history major. I'm fascinated by the contextual connections between Sister Faustina, Saint Faustina, and the Divine Mercy, and then the connections with Our Lady of Fatima and Saint John Paul II. And this is a must read. It's just mind blowing how much information there is that connects even to the present day.
Yeah, you've told me about that one. That one sounds really fascinating. So I found the book title that for me it was Spiritual Warfare and the Discernment of Spirits by Dan Burke, and I actually have it in my stack to read it again.
Oh.
I read it 2 years ago, and I want to read it again because I took so many notes and things that I wanted to implement into my own life, and then I started telling everyone else about it, and so I need to go back and read it again. Okay, the next one is Joyful. That some books you just fills you up with such joy and love of Christ, because for me this is a lot of Lives of Saints, because there's just so much goodness, and it fills me with hope for mankind. And I the joy comes from seeing how God is still working through people in our midst. So I would relate this more towards recent saints or blesseds or servant of God's and people who are, like I said, in our own timeline. So reading books, I'm trying to think, Mother Teresa, comes to mind. And then the letters, I can't think of the book name, the letters from St. Zélie Martin to Louis Martin, the parents of St. Therese, to read their letters to each other and just see their faith and their love come out through their daily mundane kind of letters that they wrote to family members was just, I don't know, it just made me smile, made me be happy.
Well, I'm going to have to borrow one of those. I can't think of a book that left me feeling joyful, not off the top of my head right now. I mean, there are books that have brought me a deep personal prayer, so to speak. Mm-hmm. And I find those occasionally in those journal meditations, that you get for either Advent or Lent. I had one year called Rejoice by Father Mark Toops. It was an Advent meditation with Mary, and it was from Ascension Press. And that year, I actually journaled in the book. I wrote in the book. And it left me with just a really positive, joyful connection. I'll use joyful there for you.
I like that. Well, so as we just kind of alluded to, there's lots of kinds of spiritual books. They're really just as varied as the authors, as the individuals, as there's just something for everybody. And a lot of them give you a glimpse of the author's relationship with Christ. You know what we should do? We should create a recommendation list. Not just like favorites of ours, but maybe a list with these, but also including books that have made a difference or impacted our spiritual lives, because that's what we're talking about is that's how true. Reading impacts our spiritual life. So what do you think? Think we should make a list and put it in the show notes?
Oh, yeah, that'd be great. We could get a list of everything that we've read and really love, and people can look at it there and get some ideas and see what calls out to them. Mm-hmm. So, yeah. And one that you might want to put on there is Story of a Soul, which is the autobiography of St. Therese of Lisieux. I know you told me you had read it before, and I read a biography about her years ago, but sometime in this past year, I finally listened to her autobiography as an audiobook. It was on Hallow, the app. I thought it was just for prayers, but they started putting audiobooks on that as well. And that counts as reading, right?
Completely. I know many friends who don't physically open a book and read it, but they listen on audiobooks. And I say wherever, it's not about whether or not you're using your eyeballs or your ears. It's about the information and the connection and the experience that you have while you're getting this information. So yes, of course, audiobooks work.
That's great, because I listen to a lot of audiobooks in my car.
I know. You know what? I've had two friends gift me copies of Introduction to the Devout Life by St. Francis de Sales. And I did struggle. They were two different translations, actually. And I struggled reading them, but I have done much better listening to them. So sometimes it's just in how you get the information, right? Whether you're listening or you're reading. You know what we should do? We have a link for a free 30-day trial for Audible. And Audible is the audiobook division of Amazon. And so we will put that in the show notes because they have been adding more and more spiritual books to their library. And, you know, I would encourage people to give it a try. I saw that one of my favorite spiritual books that I mentioned earlier, This Present Paradise, she posted or shared lately that it was added to Audible. So I'm going to go over there and listen to it as I can do it while I'm walking.
I actually have never used Audible. I've always used the local library for my audiobooks.
Well, that's a great option too.
But not a lot of spiritual books turn up in my local library. There are a few authors and a few titles, but not as big of a variety and selection as what you're describing over on Audible.
Mm-hmm. So I'm sure somebody is listening to us who's going, yeah, all sounds great. How do I make this happen in my life? Reading spiritual books. How do I do it?
You mean without getting distracted?
Well, it's a habit like anything else. New habits. If you're not used to reading, or maybe you're used to reading beach reads, chick lit, paperback fiction, which I also really love. So we did assemble a few tips to help getting into the habit.
All right, Lisa, let's have our tips.
All right. You know me, I love a good list and tip list. The first for me is to find a regular spot to make it a habit. I have 2 chairs in my breakfast room that look out the windows, and that's where I sit and I drink my coffee, and I have my stack of books next to it, and I do rotate my stack, and it's comfortable and it's relatively quiet. I have a spot to put my coffee cup, and I will go in there and sit.
Yeah, I have seen your kitchen little side chair table. It's really, really cute. You might have to post a picture someday on social and share it with people.
I can do that.
I won't, because I'm that person that just kind of reads wherever I am. But as we already mentioned, I usually keep books now on my Kindle in addition to the stack of hard copies or regular copies. But you used to tell me about how you always kept a book in the car, so that when you were in carpool line or sports practice. And I remembered that inspired me when I was working full time. I would make it a point to go to work early, and I would sit in the parking garage, and I purposefully picked a spot where there was a light overhead. And I would sit and read my daily devotional in the car before I got out and walked into the office, because once I got in there wasn't reading opportunity. And so that's when I would make my best time to read. And now it makes me feel almost lazy when I am home and I stop what I'm doing and pick up a book and read. So it's still a challenge for me to find a regular spot. So I like that tip. I'm going to have to find one here in this house.
Well, and the second tip is always have a journal or a device, because I take notes on my phone, something with you, because when you're I'm going to say when, not if, when you're inspired, when you hear something that God wants you to learn or to take to heart or to ponder, you're going to want to write it down or keep it somewhere. So whether maybe it's sticky notes, like I said, I keep notes on my phone. I have a journal. I probably should organize my notes, but anyway, everywhere I have to. That's how I internalize information, is writing it down.
Yeah, and I've mentioned I underline in books now, and I know I have written in journals before, but that doesn't mean that I remember to go back and revisit it. And so now you're inspiring me to, okay, maybe I should go back and revisit that.
Maybe that's a podcast topic for another day, is what to do with all of these.
Yes, if somebody else figures it out, they should let us know.
That's exactly right. I was like, we'll record that.
I do not have all the answers.
We'll record that when we figure it out.
Don't hold your breath.
Yeah. The next one is to remember that sometimes, well, for me, the first 5 to 10 minutes of sitting down can be really difficult. So when I first sit down or first crack open that book, my mind is going a million miles a minute because that's how I work. And it takes me a few minutes to like take that deep breath and to read and to kind of get into the moment. That's the most difficult part. And so I have to remind myself to keep going. And sometimes I'll have a time set, not actually an alarm, but I'll say, okay, I have 20 minutes right now. I never say just 5 or 10 because, like I said, it takes me a few minutes to get going. And I do the same thing. I read in adoration a lot, and I do the same thing. When I first open that book, or I have to give myself that moment to calm down, to settle, to take that breath, and then have the experience. It's not lightning. It doesn't happen that fast.
I think that tip actually applies good to a lot of different things because as you were saying it, especially going into adoration and reading a faith-based or spiritual or scripture-based book, I found myself thinking about the rosary. Sometimes when I sit down to pray the rosary, that first 5 to 10 minute, it's only 20, 25 minutes, but that first decade sometimes takes me the whole time to settle down and stick with it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Exactly. And I will say another hard one is starting a new book.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes, gosh, it's like I think of books as, these experiences, right? Sometimes you just don't know. You've never read this author. You've never read this style. So you have to give yourself the grace to get into it, but then also know that maybe you're not going to get into that book.
It's true.
There have been enough books that I read a chapter or two and I just have to say, and I'm not going to name any books, but I have to say, you know what, this isn't meant for me. Whether it's my season of life, maybe it's just what I'm going through at the moment. I'm not making a connection with this book. And it's okay not to love every book. It really is. There's so many books out there. It's simply okay. Put it down, pass it on to a friend, donate it if your parish has a lending library, or donate it, just whatever, but put it down, pick up a different one.
Oh, that is a good tip. Yeah. You and I both talked about this. Find a book club. We're both in small groups that read faith-based spiritual reading together. I know you've invited me to yours, and I've come once or twice. But we both do have our own groups that we're involved with. But I find that being in a book club is really good for motivation and accountability. And it helps me find titles to read that I might not have chosen or picked up for myself. And so that's what I mean by that accountability and motivation. I've been in a secular book club and read books I would not have chosen. And what was missing for me was finding, in addition, I mean, I do like my book club, but finding one that's a faith-based small group. You get all these fantastic ideas. I mean, they see things in a way that maybe I didn't connect with, and so we kind of inspire and feed each other. Mm-hmm. And you find yourself reading, going, "Oh my gosh, I underlined that too." And the next thing you know, you're spending 30 minutes talking about the same thing.
I know, I love it. I love it. I've been in small group spiritual reading groups for a long, long time. I absolutely love it.
One of the things I do love about spiritual reading, you gave this to me, and it's from Barb Shushkevitz. She has a little book called The Handy Little Guide on Prayer. And you shared with me a quote she had called, "Reading even a sentence or two can light a prayerful spark." And I thought that was beautiful. Mm-hmm. It goes right back to what you and I were saying at the beginning of this podcast, which is sometimes you read a sentence and you're just captivated and you have to sit and rest with it. And you said it was like a prayer.
Mm-hmm. I do. I love that. And I do highly recommend that little book too. Well, this has been fun. I think we should wrap up because I have a lot of reading to do. You've just reminded me of what I need to go do, how many books I have in my stack.
Well, anyone listening to us today is going to know where to go. So y'all come and visit our show notes for our reading recommendations.
Thank you for listening to us share and obsess about spiritual reading. You can tell that it is something that we are very passionate about and that we truly believe helps us grow closer to God. We encourage everyone to do it, whether you're reading a digital book, you're reading a physical book, or you're listening to an audiobook. We just encourage you to try it out, turn this habit into something that really will increase your faith. As we said earlier, we're going to put a list of books that have really impacted our spiritual life in the show notes. You can find them on the blog, soundmindandspirit.com. We'll also include that link to the free trial of Audible, and we encourage you to check it out if you want to try out listening to audiobooks, or maybe you love them but you've never joined Audible. Take advantage of that 30-day free trial. Let us know how it works for you. And of course, send us a message. Let us know what you're reading. I know we have enough books, but I'm always looking for new books and new authors, new spirituality, something to learn, consume. So send us a message on the blog, on social media, wherever you can find us. Let us know what you recommend. All right, Shelly, anything else you want to say about reading?
Oh, we could talk about it all day, but I think it's time to go.
It's time to go read. Thanks for joining us. We will see you here next week.